In Episode 1, we wrote the pilot charter. In Episode 2, we built the governance posture. That included the acceptable use policy, the data classification rules, and the compliance reality check. Now we're at the point where all of that has to become real. Because a governance framework does not protect the organization by itself. A charter does not prevent someone from connecting the wrong system. A policy does not stop an agent from operating outside the approved scope. That only happens when the technical configuration matches the decisions you already made. So, in this episode, we're going to walk through the technical requirements for a Claude Cowork Pilot. Not from a theoretical standpoint, but from the practical standpoint of what has to be confirmed, configured, restricted, documented, and monitored before the pilot cohort starts using the tool. And this is where a lot of pilots get into trouble. They assume the hard part is writing the governance documents. It is not. The hard part is making sure the environment actually enforces those decisions. If the charter says certain data is excluded, that needs to show up in the connector rules. If the pilot excludes certain applications, that needs to show up in the computer use posture. If only certain users are allowed to approve workflows, that needs to show up in the role design. If the pilot has a budget ceiling, that needs to show up in spend controls. This is the point where governance becomes configuration. In this episode, I'm going to walk through 6 technical decisions. First, the system requirements. This is where we confirm that participant machines and the corporate network can actually support Cowork. Second, the plan selection. Pro, Max, Team, and Enterprise are not interchangeable when you are running a governed pilot. Third, the role design. Who gets administrative authority? Who reviews governance issues? Who uses Cowork for actual work? And who should only observe? Fourth, connector and plugin governance. This is where Cowork starts touching the organization's real data, so the approval process matters. Fifth, computer use. This is the highest stakes technical decision in the pilot, and it should never be treated as a casual feature setting. And sixth, spend limits and observability. These are the controls that help you manage cost, monitor usage, and detect problems early. This episode has more individual decisions than almost any other part of the pilot. So this is one of those episodes you may want to come back to when you are actually configuring the environment. Let's start with the most basic question. Can the participant's machine actually run Cowork? That sounds obvious, but it is one of the most common things teams skip. Before you select the plan, before you configure roles, and before you invite participants, you need to verify that the machines and the network environment can support the pilot. Because if you wait until day 1, the problem shows up in the worst possible way. The participant downloads the application, tries to install it, and then finds out their machine is not compatible. Or the app installs, but the corporate firewall blocks the traffic. Or the connector does not work because the approved endpoint is not reachable from the company network. At that point, you do not have a technical setup issue anymore. You have a pilot readiness issue. So the first requirement is the operating system. Cowork runs through the Claude desktop application. That means the participant needs access to the desktop app on a supported operating system. As of the technical scope used for this pilot, that means macOS 11, Big Sur, or higher, or Windows 10 or higher. Linux is not currently part of the supported desktop setup for this pilot. It is also important to understand that Cowork is not something you should plan around as a web or mobile-only experience. Mobile can support certain paired workflows, especially when dispatch is involved, but the agent itself is operating from the desktop environment. So for pilot planning, assume the desktop application is the primary delivery surface. The second requirement is hardware. Cowork uses a virtualized environment on the participant's machine. On macOS, that means the machine needs to support Apple's virtualization framework. In practical terms, most newer Apple Silicon machines are going to be the cleanest fit, while some older Intel Macs may require closer review. On Windows, the concern is Hyper-V support. That usually means Windows 10 Pro or higher, with hardware virtualization enabled in BIOS or UEFI. And this is worth saying directly. Windows Home Editions can create a real compatibility issue. That may not matter for developer teams because they are usually issued higher spec machines. But for business users, operations teams, learning teams, finance teams, HR teams, or other non-technical groups, it is not unusual to find lower-tier Windows configurations. That is why the readiness check matters. Do not assume that because the employee has a corporate laptop, the laptop can support the pilot. The third requirement is network access. Cowork requires a continuous internet connection because model inference runs in the cloud. If the connection drops, the active session is interrupted. For organizations with more restrictive network policies, this needs to be reviewed with IT before the pilot begins. You need to verify that the corporate firewall, proxy, and web filtering systems allow traffic to the required Anthropic services, the Claude desktop update channel, and any approved MCP connector endpoints. That last part matters. If your pilot approves connectors for Slack, Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, or other third-party systems, those network paths need to be checked separately. Just because Claude Desktop can connect does not automatically mean every connector will work cleanly in the corporate environment. This is why system readiness should be a named item in the pre-pilot checklist, with a clear owner. Not participants will install it when we start. Not IT can help if something comes up. A real readiness item. Machines verified. Operating systems verified. Hardware support verified. Network paths verified. Connector endpoints verified. If you do that before the pilot starts, you prevent a lot of day one friction. Now let's talk about plan selection. Claude Cowork is available on paid Claude plans, but the plans are not the same from a governance standpoint. And for a structured enterprise pilot, this distinction matters. Pro and Max are individual plans. They are useful for individual exploration. They are useful when one person wants to understand the tool, test workflows, or get familiar with the experience. But they are not the right foundation for a governed pilot. The reason is simple. Individual plans do not give the organization the administrative controls it needs. You do not get the same level of centralized access management, auditability, role design, identity enforcement, or enterprise analytics. So if you are running a real pilot with documented governance, defined participants, approved workflows, and executive review, Pro is not the right operating model. Max gives an individual more capacity, but it is still an individual plan. It does not solve the governance problem. Team is the first level where the organization starts getting basic administrative control. A team plan can support smaller pilots, especially in lower risk environments. It gives owners some ability to manage users and configure certain settings. It can be workable for a small, non-regulated evaluation. But team has limits. For regulated industries, or for pilots that are meant to prove readiness for scaled deployment, team may not give you enough. That is where enterprise becomes important. Enterprise is the operational floor for a serious regulated industry pilot. That does not mean every organization must start there for every experiment. But if the pilot is in healthcare, financial services, insurance, legal, pharmaceuticals, or any environment where compliance and governance matter, enterprise is usually the right baseline. Why? Because enterprise is where you get the controls that allow the pilot to behave like a managed business system instead of an individual productivity tool. That includes custom role-based access controls, single sign-on enforcement, SCIM provisioning, stronger identity lifecycle management, tenant restrictions, analytics, audit-related exports, compliance AP/IS, and business associate agreement availability where applicable. Those are not minor conveniences. They are part of what lets the organization prove that the pilot was controlled. A common mistake is to start on a lower plan because it feels cheaper, then realize later that the pilot did not test the production posture. So the organization ends up doing the pilot twice. Once on a lightweight setup that produces interesting usage feedback, and then again on enterprise to prove the security and governance model. In many cases, that second round costs more in time, coordination, and credibility than starting with the appropriate plan from the beginning. So my recommendation is this. Use Pro or Max for personal learning and early familiarization. Use Team for small, low-risk, non-regulated pilots. Use Enterprise when the pilot needs to prove governed deployment. Once the plan decision is made, the next step is role design. This is where we decide who can do what, and it is important to understand that RBAC is necessary, but it is not sufficient by itself. Role-based access controls help govern administrative capabilities, but not every Cowork risk is controlled through RBAC. Connectors, plugins, MCP servers, and browser or computer use settings may be governed through separate policies. So the identity design for the pilot needs to combine several layers. You need the RBAC role assignment, you need connector policy, you need plugin allow listing, you need computer use scoping, and you need a process for changing any of those settings during the pilot. For most pilots, I would recommend 4 practical roles. The first role is the pilot administrator. This is the person responsible for the technical configuration of the pilot. They provision users, they remove users, they assign roles, they configure the approved connector list, they manage group spend limits, they access analytics and telemetry, and if a governance issue occurs, they can reverse access quickly. But this is important. The pilot administrator does not create the governance policy. They implement it. The policy decisions come from the governance owner and the governance structure we established earlier. The pilot administrator's job is to translate those decisions into the system configuration. The second role is the governance reviewer. This person evaluates workflow proposals, incidents, and scope questions during the pilot. The governance reviewer may not need full administrative authority inside Cowork. Their role is not necessarily to configure the system. Their role is to interpret policy, review risk, approve or reject certain workflow expansions, and escalate concerns when needed. This distinction matters. Configuration authority and governance authority are not always the same thing. The third role is the operational practitioner. This is the person actually using Cowork to do work. Operational practitioners have access to the approved workflows, approved connectors, approved plugins, and the computer use posture defined by the pilot. They are the core users in the pilot. They are also responsible for raising scope questions before they proceed. If they are unsure whether a workflow is approved, they do not guess. They escalate to the pilot champion or the governance path defined in the playbook. The fourth role is the executive observer. This role is often overlooked, but I think it is useful. Executive observers need enough access to understand what the pilot is producing. They may need to see outputs, review examples, and experience the tool in a limited way. But they usually do not need the full action surface. In most cases, executive observers should be limited to read-only or chat-style workflows. No computer use, no dispatch, no scheduled tasks, limited connector access. Usually no plugin access, unless there is a specific business reason. The purpose of the executive observer role is to give leadership operational familiarity without increasing risk unnecessarily. For a 20-person pilot, the structure might look like this. 2 pilot administrators, 1 primary and 1 backup, 1 or 2 governance reviewers, 12 to 15 operational practitioners across the participating departments, and 2 to 4 executive observers from the sponsoring leadership team. Your exact numbers may vary, but the principle is the same. Do not let the role mix emerge accidentally. Design it. And when roles change mid-pilot, treat that as a governance event. If an executive observer becomes an operational practitioner, log it. If an operational practitioner loses access, log it. If someone gets added to the pilot halfway through, log it. Role changes are not just technical changes. They are changes to the controlled pilot environment. Now let's move to connectors and plugins. This is where Cowork starts touching the organization's real systems and real data. And that means the approval process needs to be treated as a security review, not just an enablement decision. A regulated industry pilot should start with a curated connector list before week 1. Not, we will add connectors as people ask for them. Not, everyone can connect whatever helps them work faster. A curated list. Each connector should be reviewed for what it can access, what actions it can perform, whether read-only restrictions are available, what data classification applies, and who is allowed to use it. Wherever possible, start with read-only configurations. That gives the pilot enough access to demonstrate value without opening the full action surface on day 1. If someone requests a new connector during the pilot, the default answer should be no until the review is complete. That may sound strict, but it is the right posture. A pilot is not just about proving what the tool can do. It is about proving whether the organization can control what the tool can do. Plugin governance follows the same logic. Plugins can be extremely powerful because they package together skills, commands, and MCP servers for a specific role or department. A finance plugin might include finance-specific data connectors, reporting commands, and analysis workflows. A marketing plugin might include campaign data, content workflows, brand guidance, and publishing-related commands. That is useful because it lets the organization shape Cowork around a department's real work, instead of giving everyone a generic agent. But it also means the plugin can become a packaged access point into sensitive workflows. So the pilot needs 3 plugin governance components. First, a plugin allow list. This is the list of plugins approved for the pilot. Second, a source policy. This defines where approved plugins can come from. For many enterprise pilots, the preferred answer is a private marketplace only, with any public marketplace plugin reviewed case by case. Third, a review process. Someone needs to review the plugin manifest, the connectors included in the plugin, and any skills or commands that involve code execution, data movement, or system actions. For a first pilot, I would be cautious with custom plugins. If a custom plugin is built specifically for the organization during the pilot, it may be valuable, but it can also blur the pilot results. Now you are no longer just evaluating Cowork. You are evaluating Cowork plus a custom-built extension. That may be appropriate later, but for Phase 1, I would usually defer custom plugins unless they are absolutely necessary. Keep the first pilot clean. Use approved connectors. Use approved plugins. Document what was enabled. Then measure the results against that specific configuration. Now let's talk about the highest stakes technical decision in the pilot, computer use. This is the capability that makes Cowork different from a normal chat assistant. It is also the capability that can create the most exposure if it is not scoped carefully. Computer use allows the agent to interact with applications on the user's machine. It can open files, navigate screens, click through interfaces, fill in forms, and work across tools. Combined with dispatch, the agent may be able to perform work while the user is away. Combined with scheduled tasks, it may be able to do that on a recurring basis. That is powerful. But the more power the agent has, the more deliberate the controls need to be. This is why computer use should not be treated as a feature toggle. It is a governance decision. The pilot should choose one of three postures. Posture A is computer use disabled. This is the most conservative option. It is also the right option for many first pilots, especially in regulated environments. With Posture A, the pilot can still demonstrate a lot of value. Cowork can support document workflows, research workflows, analysis workflows, summarization, planning, and connector-based work. But it is not directly controlling applications on the machine. That keeps the initial action surface smaller while the organization learns how participants actually use the tool. Posture B is read-only computer use within a named application allow list. This allows the agent to observe and navigate approved applications, but not submit forms, click action buttons, or complete transactions. This can be useful when the pilot needs to evaluate research, discovery, or information gathering workflows across business systems. The key is that the applications are named in advance, and the agent's authority is limited. Posture C is action-capable computer use within a named application allow list. This is the most advanced posture. In this model, the agent can take action inside approved applications. It may complete forms, submit information, operate workflows, or move work forward across systems. This is where Cowork can demonstrate end-to-end automation, but this is also where the risk increases significantly. For most first pilots in regulated industries, I would not start with Posture C. I would usually start with Posture A. For a second phase pilot, after the organization has validated the governance model, Posture B may be appropriate. Posture C should generally come later, after the organization has proven that the controls, monitoring, escalation paths, and documentation discipline are working. And whatever posture you choose, document it in three places. Document it in the charter, document it in the acceptable use policy, and document it in the technical setup checklist. If the posture changes mid-pilot, that is not a casual admin change. That is a governance decision. It should go through the governance reviewer, and if it materially changes the pilot scope, it should trigger a charter amendment. Now let's move to spend limits and observability. This is the final technical configuration before the cohort starts using Cowork. Group spend limits give you a way to cap usage at the team or group level. For a pilot, this does two things. First, it creates a cost ceiling. The organization knows the maximum exposure before the pilot begins. Second, it creates an anomaly signal. If a pilot group suddenly hits a spend limit much earlier than expected, something changed. That change could be legitimate. Maybe the team found a high-value workflow and is using Cowork more than expected. But it could also indicate a runaway loop, an unintended workflow pattern, or a participant working outside the approved catalog. So the spend limit is not just a budget control. It is also an operational monitoring signal. A practical approach is to estimate expected usage per participant, Then set the threshold high enough to allow normal exploration, but low enough to catch unusual behavior. For many pilots, that means setting the limit at roughly 2 to 3 times the expected steady-state usage. The exact number depends on your plan, pricing, workflow mix, and participant count. But the principle is simple. Do not leave the pilot uncapped. Define the expected usage, set the threshold, document the rationale, and monitor it during the pilot. The second part is observability. Open telemetry support allows cowork activity to feed into existing observability tools, depending on the organization's setup. That may include tools like Splunk, Datadog, Elastic, or another OTEL-compatible stack. For the pilot, this is useful because it helps monitor how workflows are behaving. Are sessions running longer than expected? Are certain tools being invoked more often than expected? Are connector patterns changing? Are scheduled tasks failing? Are error rates increasing? That kind of operational telemetry gives the pilot team visibility into what is happening, but we need to be precise about what it is and what it is not. Operational telemetry is not the same thing as formal audit evidence. It can help you monitor activity. It can help you detect anomalies. It can help you understand usage patterns. It can help you troubleshoot problems. But if your compliance team needs formal audit evidence, you need to confirm what Anthropic provides, what your internal systems capture, and what your regulatory requirements actually demand. Do not overclaim what telemetry proves. Use it appropriately. Now, before we close, there is one final point I want to make. Every technical decision in this episode produces a governance artifact, not just a configuration. An artifact. That distinction matters. If the pilot administrator configures roles, there should be an RBAC role assignment matrix. If the team approves connectors, there should be a connector approval list with security review notes. If plugins are allowed, there should be a plugin allow list with manifest review notes. If computer use is disabled, read-only, or action-capable, there should be computer use posture documentation. If group spend limits are configured, there should be a written threshold rationale. If open telemetry is enabled, there should be documentation showing where the data goes and how it is used. None of these documents needs to be long. In most cases, each one can be a page or less. But they matter because they become evidence at the go-no-go review. They show that the pilot was not just configured by memory, preference, or convenience. It was configured according to the governance decisions the organization made. That is what gives the pilot credibility. A pilot that is technically configured but poorly documented creates a problem at review time. The team has to reconstruct what happened. Who had access? Which connector was approved? When did the role change? Why was computer use enabled? What was the spend threshold based on? Where did telemetry go? Those are not questions you want to answer from memory. You want the artifacts. So the takeaway for this episode is simple. Technical setup is governance in operational form. Verify the machines. Verify the network. Select the right plan. Design the roles. Curate the connectors and plugins. Scope computer use carefully. Configure spend limits. Enable observability where appropriate. And document every decision. That is how you move from a governance framework on paper to a pilot environment that is actually controlled. In the next episode, we move from technical setup to cohort design. We will look at the cohort composition matrix, how to choose the right mix of participants, why the pilot champion role matters, and how cohort design changes across industries like insurance, healthcare, and financial services. And if you are configuring a Cowork Pilot now and want the technical setup checklist and RBAC role definitions in editable form, those are included in Part 3 of the Cowork Pilot Playbook, linked below. Thanks for watching, and if you're considering a Claude Cowork Pilot at your organization, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification icon so you'll know when the next video in this series is released. And if you're ready for a practical place to start, I have several guides, including a newly released Claude Cowork Pilot Playbook available for purchase. Visit cahillnet.com for guides, bundles, SCORM courses, and more. Until next time.